I want to just start, so I gave you kind of the brief overview of who each of these individuals are, but I want to just kind of set the stage a little bit more to give you all the opportunities to give us a little bit more about your background, your current position, and specifically how it interfaces with local food or local farms. Robert, sorry, you want to go first?
So Robert Eversole, Director of Sustainability UK, as you already know. Ashton pretty much covered my background. I don't like talking about myself, so very briefly, my background was in healthcare. Thought I wanted to go into a physician-based route, and I was 1 credit hour short one semester, and I decided to just randomly pick a class. Is inequality making us sick? And during that class, it focused heavily on how decades, hundreds of years of systemic racism in the United States has created an inequitable food system that has triggered most of the diseases that we see in marginalized communities. I kind of fell in love with that thought that semester, and when I finished that class, I decided that medicine was not the field I wanted to be in anymore. I knew I wanted to do something in food. I'd never worked in food once in my entire life. And I thought, what better way to start this journey than crawl before you walk? So I decided to find a farm and raise the food so that I could understand from seed to consumer what it took and what we were asking of the people that were producing our food. Did that for a decade. It started out as a CSA farm. We transitioned over into an institutional wholesale farm over that decade, and ended with starting the local salad bar at UK, growing about 2,000 pounds of baby salad greens a week. And ultimately, my predecessor, Carolyn Gaughan, and this is a testament to the local food system, she was promoted into the global supply chain at Aramark, where she is now the director of Farm to Institution, which is the first position of its kind in any major food service organization. And I now get the privilege of working with local Kentucky farms to identify who's willing and what it's going to take to get them to be able to sell to us. We don't like to go out there and just dangle the carrot in front of them and say, this is what we're looking for, who wants to do it. We like to identify people that are willing and ready to be partners in our journey as we try to expand Kentucky produce for consumers and students on our campus. That's a pretty good Reader's Digest version of my background, so I'll go ahead and pass it off.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. My kids would say they don't have any trouble hearing me, but I'm Marty, Flynn, and as Ashton mentioned, this is my 43rd year in child nutrition. I always tell people I started when I was 10, but it doesn't always work. But anyway, so I started out as cafeteria manager, and then at an elementary school, skipped middle school, went to high school, and ran a central kitchen out of Lafayette. Also worked as a supervisor over high schools and middle schools, and then became child nutrition coordinator, which is sort of like the assistant food service director. Left and went with KSNA, and now I am with Protein Associates, and we are a resource for child nutrition programs nationwide, and so that is where I am right now. Was part of starting the farm to school program with Fayette County. Loved it. My husband said it was my middle name. So I think my best story with farm to school was meeting someone at 11:30 at night to get blueberries in the McDonald's parking lot. So anyway, that was kind of it.
It takes those types of individual, if you want to ask, well, what does it take to get more local food? That's one of the reasons. Driving to McDonald's at whatever time you said, it takes the people willing to prioritize it and say, I'm going to do this. Was that hard? She didn't have to do that. She's going above and beyond to make it work because she believed in it. So I just want to emphasize, Robert does the same. I know Brian and his team will do the same, but it really takes those champions in those institutions to make it happen. So, Brian.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to thank Rob I met Rob about 3 years ago. We actually planned and then implemented a smart growth conference down in Danville that we hosted at Center College, and learned a lot about what's happening here in central Kentucky, and it's wonderful. As far as my background, it's kind of split into two careers. One was in the corporate world, which I did for about 15, 16 years around the country, including Dayton, Ohio, and South Carolina, and then up to New York. And then kind of on a fluke, I got into higher education, and the fluke was I was looking for a job. I was living in upstate New York. I wasn't going to move because I was raising two young kids by myself, and a friend of mine introduced me to this college president that might have been looking for a vice president of finance. So I met with her and we hit it off, but her person didn't end up retiring, stayed on a little bit longer. And she said, well, if he ever retires, I'll give you a call. And he decided like within weeks that he didn't want to stay, so she hired me. It was a small college in upstate New York in the Catskills. And so I got to love higher education. I ended up at Center College just a few years back working for John Roush. He gives me a lot of freedom to do things that are important to the college, but also important to me personally. And so one of the things we started to work on with the help of faculty members and staff members was sustainability programs. And at first, sustainability was pretty much categorized as energy, savings, looking for different ways to improve efficiencies almost entirely in our buildings. And I was able to, with the help of many, including Nick Bowman, who's here from Center College, he's our one and only and brand new sustainability person. So that's part of the progress that we made. We went from a group of volunteers to a full-time person, and he's doing a great job. But we looked at a lot of different things, and one of the things we really put a lot of focus on was food. And there was some limitations because the contract that we had when I arrived was very limited. It didn't require anything related to buying local. It wasn't connected to Kentucky Proud program. So when this contract came up, we did a very competitive RFP process, and in it included one of the top 5 things was sustainability and local food. And long story short, we hired a firm just June 1st. They're on campus doing camps and conferences, but very, very proud of the work they're going to do. Their sustainability person's actually in Kentucky. He's arriving today. He's visiting, where's Half Harvest? He's visiting you all tomorrow. And so very excited that we actually have this team of people that are dedicated to this cause. So
when we say local food, the word local, much like sustainability, I would argue, although I'm not an expert in sustainability, local means different things to different people, right? It is place-based. Local can mean different things, and that's okay. It sometimes can vary widely, but it's important to define it. It's important to put parameters around what is local. So, for example, I'm not picking on Kroger, work with them closely, but for example, if you've seen at Kroger the I'm local sign, raise your hand if you've seen the I'm local signs at Kroger. Okay, so that means, in case you're wondering, 150, that product was sourced from 150 miles from the closest distribution center, which for us in Lexington is Louisville. So if you draw 150 miles around Louisville, where does that get you? Michigan, it's 150 miles is a long way. And they're a big corporation, they're doing the best they can, that's how they're defining it. But so when you go to the grocery store in Lexington, there could be some Kentucky Farm products on there, but they aren't, of course, identifying in the way that perhaps some of us who care about these things would like them to. So, local means different things to different people. When I say local for my work, both at the city and now at the University of Kentucky, my local is Kentucky, the geographic boundary of Kentucky. And I won't get into the weeds about why that is, but to me that makes the most sense given where I'm situated and the work that I do. So I'm curious, I'd love for each of these folks on our panel to talk about, in terms of your organization or your personal, if your organization doesn't define it, your personal reflections on what local means to you.
So we work with our individual clients to define what local means to them. And so in my current position at the University of Kentucky, as Ashton mentioned, local is defined as the geographic boundary of Kentucky.
When I was working with the farm to school program with Bay County Schools, we sort of did the same thing. Anything that came from Kentucky we considered local. I think one time we did have something from southern part of Indiana, but we always tried to do a map and show the kids where it was located according to us, and so we always like to keep it in Kentucky. With the new website that Ashton shared with you all, they're saying 75 miles. So I think it varies, but we always said Kentucky.
Very similar to the other two in our contract. We had to define it some way, and so we defined it as 100 miles, but Kentucky Proud is a big part of what we're trying to really promote. We also defined it, I don't know if you have percentages, a minimum of 25% of our food, which is a lot.
So when you hear local, be sure you just probe a little bit. And you see it on restaurant menus, you see it in the grocery store. That transparency is important. So Robert, I think it's important to share the UK Dining Aramark partnership is really, really unique. If you don't mind sharing with us a little bit about why those key performance indicators are in the contract, some of the context that led up to them.
Aramark had won the contract at UK to provide food service for the next couple of decades, and initially the contract had just a tiny blip mentioning Kentucky Proud, that we would continue our purchase of Kentucky Proud. It was very generic, and the person that was in my position was more of a finance economics person, business person, and so they took the contract by the letter of the law and they bought Kentucky Proud stuff. It wasn't the best. It was the easiest, most accessible thing, and that was a lot of Coca-Cola products and ice. They basically found what they were already purchasing that counted and just counted it as that. There was an article that came out in the paper, and we all came to the table and we revisited the contract and we came up with some modifications that we were all happy with. And that stipulated and spelled out specifically what would count as Kentucky Farm Impact, and it separated it out from Kentucky Food Business Impact. So we have two buckets, one that goes to the actual farmer and one that is going to someone that is adding some sort of value to the product. Right now the KPIs sit at around $750,000 for direct farm impact and around slightly over $2 million to Kentucky food businesses. At UK, we tend to rely on local restaurants for our food business impact, and of course all of the farm impact. We actually maintain traceability back to the individual farm the products come from.
Brian, you alluded to a little bit the 25% target. Are there any, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Is that 25% Kentucky Proud, 25% direct farm impact?
Direct farm impact. It isn't Coca-Cola, it isn't Pepsi, nothing against Coca-Cola or Pepsi. It's not Jif peanut butter, right, which could be considered local. It is grow, raise, or catch. And then all those other things are bonus, right? So we expect them to get as much as we can from local distributors, local manufacturers, local, other categories like that. But the main thing is the raise, catch, farm.
Brian, we talked, you alluded to this a little bit, but given it's so recent, and it was really exciting to be a part of the conversation with Olivia and others as you all were thinking about rebidding the food service contract. Can you share a little bit about the why? You as a college were interested in encouraging your dining partner to go in that direction.
I mean, there's a number of reasons. Honestly, it's important to the students, right? This generation thinks about these things, I think, a lot more than certainly my generation would have, or my generation does, perhaps. And so it's important to the students. We see it, right, as a marketing tool, as a recruitment tool. Our head of communications has been meeting with Parkhurst to talk about these things that never really happened before. We want to brag about our food, how great it is, how tasty it is, how diverse it is, but also about the sustainability element of that. Center, I think every college and university has this responsibility, especially in a small town, but it's part of the local economy, right? So it helps the local economy. The more that we can do locally within Danville, Boyle County, the region, the state of Kentucky, it helps everyone. The other thing is the more schools, whether that's K through 12, colleges, universities, we're going to try to work with our local hospital as an example to help them create some of these programs. The more the merrier. I think about how difficult this would have been to have these programs 10 years ago. And now we have organizations that help us manage through this. And then those are probably the key points. It's important to the college. I've worked for two presidents at Center, President Roush and President Moreland. They both absolutely support it. So it's been kind of easy, and I know at some schools it's not. It's a lot of times it is probably about the money. I get to be the CFO at Center College, so I get to worry about that. No one else has to, so that helps as well.
That's great. And I just want to highlight something you shared about leveraging, getting buy-in among multiple organizations, institutions to leverage their buying power. That is really critical for Kentucky farmers in terms of market development. Robert, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you leverage, you and the Aramark team at UK Dining have leveraged your very unique contract to influence purchasing at other regional Aramark.
So I like to think that UK is the petri dish of local ag within Aramark accounts. It kind of gives us, the contract gives us the ability to experiment with different ways of obtaining local foods. The real difficulty of local foods in Kentucky is that it's very cyclical, right? Like we have a traditional agricultural cycle. We produce during the summer, farmers take the winter off. I mean, the going joke in the farm community is God made winters for farmers. And we're asking farmers to not take the winter off, right? To some degree. But we also have to utilize other businesses in Kentucky to kind of shore that up. And so, for example, Custom Food Solution is a Louisville-based business which basically creates recipes specific for your organization of business. So I like to think of Custom Food Solution as my grandmother. We are asking Kentucky farmers to raise these products. We're shipping them to Custom Food Solutions, asking them to process them, can them, if you will, or freeze them, so that we can use them through winter, so that we can continue to have this non-stop source of Kentucky farm products. But when UK Dining goes to Custom Food Solution and creates this new product, suddenly it's a new product that's sitting there for everyone else to source from. Now we can take this down to WKU, we can take this to EKU, we can take this to U of L. But it doesn't stop there. Ashton was in a meeting with us, with several other KDA members, where we are trying to create a new product which can then be distributed out to K through 12 schools. And we are starting that. We're the only ones that are doing it right now, and we're hoping that everyone else comes online with us because we like to set the standard. We like to be the first to the punch. We like to create the new products, and then you just see them slowly trickle out to other universities around the state. So I like to think of it as the petri dish because it's where everything starts to grow and it spreads out from there.
And also just to the price point, affordability standpoint, so real advantages to price points can be leveraged when we have multiple. So UK Dining, because of their unique contract, is able perhaps to pay, or paying what they're paying, right? K through 12 schools are at a different price point, but if we can make one batch of this new product and have multiple buyers for it, we can bring that product unit costs down for everyone. So everyone wins in that scenario. Marty, I wonder if you can remember back to your state county days, food service director days. Did you ever work collaboratively with other districts when purchasing? I know it's a district by district process, but just curious if that leveraging buying power played into anything you did at Dade County or with KEDC. You know, is there any opportunity to leverage cooperative buying power among school districts for local food?
We, with Fayette County being as large as it is, we didn't try to leverage, with the other districts. We would concentrate pretty much on one school or one group of schools at a time, which gave us, leverage a little bit. But we, you know, and each district's purchasing criteria is so different, what their minimum is, and, you know, how the bid can be before, you know, how low the bid can be before you have, it has to be a competitive bid, that type of thing, so we did not.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. Local purchasing doesn't mean you have to change everything that you're offering. It's just about identifying the products that make sense, that you can do in volume, that make a difference to the Kentucky farmer, and then it's a win-win there.
Well, that, if I may add, that kind of helped us solve the distribution process too. Farmers can't afford to go to every school, so if they can go to a group of schools, or we can get it to surrounding schools or whatever, that helps a lot, but it's difficult.
Yeah, logistics, distribution certainly are challenges. Marty, I wonder if you could share a little bit about what were some of the key wins. Can you talk about specific products when you were at Fayette County that went well, both in terms of student acceptability, but also from a cafeteria, a logistics preparation perspective?
Okay, I'm trying to think.
Yeah,
our first venture into farm to school was at Lansdowne Elementary, and we got 400 plus students to try asparagus, locally grown asparagus. And some of the teachers had not had asparagus before, so it was, we found out if you give a kid a sticker, they pretty much will do anything. But anyway, but no, we were really talked it up, and we did, we tried to buy into the education part of it too. So we would have maps of where the farm was. We had pictures of it growing in the field. We had the farmer wasn't able to be there, but we had pictures of the farmer. And we talked about the nutrition aspect of it, you know, how it grew early and how it, you know, these beautiful plants and all that. And we found out that with educating the students, not just feeding them, presented a much bigger impact. Another success we had was at William Wells Brown, which is an inner city school. And we did beets, locally grown beets that were grown right here in Fayette County. The science teacher had the kids grow beets in plexiglass planters, so the kids could see the beets growing underground. So before we did this program with, you know, the kids tasting beets, they had actually grown beets, and they had seen them. They, you know, they experienced growing them, and we talked about the nutrition aspect of it. The science teacher had the display there while we were trying the beets. We just steamed them. We just gave them little bite-sized pieces. We didn't put it on the serving line because I think that gets lost if you know, it's just part of lunch or whatever. So I think that was probably our biggest success, was doing that. And then we also at Russell Cave did a whole meal that was local, and I had an intern from Transylvania. And so we had the extra hands and extra help, and that was pretty much all she did. And we did the local beef, and that was a success as well.
Robert, I know that this has been a challenge with a different demographic, college students. Can you share a little bit about your all's attempts at student engagement around local good, bad, and ugly?
Yeah, so this is honestly where we have the most opportunity for growth, is telling the local story. We have giant walls in the dining hall, just as big as this wall behind you, that tell the local story. We've hung portraits of the farmers up on giant posters. We've done a little bit of everything. And the reason why I tell you that I don't think that the marketing to this generation is working is because I was holding interviews for an intern for UK Dining, and these are all UK students, and during the interview I just asked them to tell me, what is your favorite sustainability thing that we do? You're applying for an internship in sustainability, you should have a favorite. But every intern could only think of one sustainability initiative that we did, and that was our green to-go container, which is basically the only way you can get food to go, a reusable to-go container. They mention nothing about local food, nothing about the just dozens of things that we do that are super cool. And I was kind of flabbergasted. And so I've talked to multiple people around campus, and this seems to be kind of a demographic challenge. So really, I think it's twofold. One is that this generation just expects it. They think that this is the status quo. We should already be doing this. They don't want to hear that you've started doing it. They just expect you to have always done it. It's the right thing to do, so why aren't you doing it? The marketing doesn't really need to go to that generation. It needs to go to the people that have money to pay for these products. That's who the marketing should probably target. And if we are going to target this younger generation, Gen Z, and the subsequent generations, it's going to have to be on their technology, which is things like TikTok. You would be kind of astounded at the different type of engagement we get posting something to Facebook or Instagram versus Twitter versus TikTok. These are very, very different responses, and we're still trying to figure them all out. And from someone who's working with farmers and buyers and large organizations, I don't tend to think about TikTok very often. So this is something we're going to put a lot of focus on this year. We have a team of, I think, 10 or 12 interns for our marketing team, and this is going to be something that they focus on, is creating content nonstop, almost every day. And that's the other part of it. It needs to be consistent, it needs to be repetitive, because what you post today, the person tomorrow is not going to see that, a new person's going to see it, and you're going to get a different level of engagement with every different topic, even though you feel like you're telling the same story over and over. So like I said when I started this comment, it really is our biggest opportunity for growth, and we are still trying to hone in on what is the best approach to targeting each different demographic.
So Brian, it may be too early to tell, but it sounds like the college marketing and PR folks are already engaged with Parkhurst. Do you envision leaning on Parkhurst to kind of tell that story about, or do you think that that's
in a partnership, and exactly the same thing, TikTok and other social media things that I've never ever used and don't plan to use, don't need to use, but for them it's everything. So we're learning that, just not for food service, but even how we market the college itself. But it's an ongoing partnership. We're going to have a student intern that's going to be, they have a marketing position, and then there'll be a student intern, and that's part of their job, is getting the word out to our students.
Robert, I wonder if you could share, so you talked a little bit about untapped opportunities for student engagement. Could you also talk about what you view as perhaps the biggest untapped opportunity for local purchasing from your vantage point, either products that you'd like to see farmers growing, or gaps in sourcing?
The largest untapped opportunity is going to come from someone that is adding value to Kentucky fresh produce. We often think about adding value to something like a tomato, turning that into a tomato sauce that can go on a pizza, or turning milk into cheese, these shelf-stable sort of products. But what about the salad farmers that are out there that are standing sorting lettuce for hours and hours and hours before it's sent out? Because turns out, weeds don't grow in an Arizona desert, but they do grow in a Kentucky field. And that's something that farmers have to deal with. We're not going to go out there and spray Roundup and destroy our soils. We have to realize that to produce these foods, there's going to be some sort of contamination in them. And it's organic contamination, right? You may have a spider, a bug. These are all things that we've dealt with throughout the launch of our local produce on the salad bar. These are the realities of farming in a temperate climate. And the equipment that's necessary for farmers to have a ready-to-eat product, or a product that can just be dumped and served, which is what most large institutions need given the staffing constraints they face, someone needs to come in and purchase this equipment. It's several hundreds of thousands of dollars. And who that is, I don't have the answer. Is it a food processor that we already have in the state? Is this a new venture? Is this a cooperative of farmers? There's many, many different creative solutions to the problem. But we need a place for farmers to go where they can just say, okay, I've grown the product. I don't want to be the marketer. I don't want to be all of these other things that's required of me. I want to take this product, drop it off, and it's sold under some sort of standardized brand, so that we have a one-stop shop we can go to. We can find these products. and we can have a ready-to-eat product. Because as I start to work with other school systems, I start to notice that, especially for K through 12, a ready-to-eat product is almost essential. And we really don't have anyone in this space creating ready-to-eat products out of our fresh farm products that we're growing and trying to market to these institutions.
Challenges are many. Is it scale of producers? Is it price point? Is it logistics? All of the above.
So we've kind of got the logistics piece figured out, luckily. We have a lot of strong partners in Kentucky. I'm also a fan of the more stakeholders you add to a process, the more resiliency you have in the system, because more people have skin in the game. So the logistics piece, believe it or not, even though it's the most difficult, I feel the most confident in it. But some of the issues we've learned is when we entered this space, we thought we should be as flexible as possible, take what you can get, but now we're learning we should kind of be as specific as possible. You wouldn't believe the difference in, for example, cherry tomato is my classic go-to example here. We sourced a cherry tomato mix. All of the cherry tomatoes were different colors, but they were of similar size, at least on the farm side. But by the time they made it out to the salad bar where the students were picking through them, they were leaving one color of tomato every time. Is this a color issue? Is this a variety choice? No, it turns out that that tomato was slightly, imperceptibly larger than the other 3 varieties of tomatoes, which required you to cut it in half. So the students refused to eat it. So at this point now we have to go back and ask the kitchen staff, can you please cut all of these cherry tomatoes in half? Well, you can bet the next season we went to the farmer and we said, hey, we know that this tomato was only 25 grams, but these other 3 weighed 20 grams each. Do you think we could find a color that is of this size? And that saved hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in labor cost, of wasted food, all of these other sustainability things that we deal with. But just by asking for that one thing at the outset during the crop planting stage, which I believe is the linchpin of local agriculture, is those forward commitments and crop planning, we were able to solve so many issues further down the line. But it's often things that you don't even think about that are going to be the issue. My other favorite story is, unfortunately, a video that made it onto social media of a spider crawling out of the salad greens on the salad bar. Despite being washed multiple times on the farm, being washed multiple times in the kitchen, dozens of eyes going on it, unfortunately we don't have the fancy little laser, air-powered lettuce sorter here in Kentucky, and so these are the realities we deal with. One last example to just broaden how impossible these things are to think of. Sweet potatoes, which we sourced from here in Kentucky, came in 50-pound bags, and we realized the farmer had not washed them, but they had dug the potatoes when it was very wet, and so each potato had a ton of mud stuck to it. That was now hard as a rock. We had to scrub them off in the sinks. Well, that actually clogged the sinks up, and we had to call in a company to come in and get all the mud out of the drains in the kitchen. So the next time we worked with farmers, we said, hey, the potatoes have to be washed. Not something we thought we ever needed to say or specify, but it is. So my advice is to be overly specific. It's going to hurt no one. It may seem intuitive to be very flexible because you're working of who you're working with, the population, but just be specific.
So talk a little bit, we were talking with Brian, from the administration perspective, how do we get more administrators in higher education to care about local food? How do we engage more administrators to prioritize these things when they're negotiating contracts?
Well, I mean, Robert and, part of what I even opened up with, but I heard it from him directly as well, was it's just expected. I mean, it's really not even an option. And so, and if you could also use it in some ways for additional PR, I think that's important. As I said, it's such an important element for a college or university to buy local and do business locally anyhow. I think the opportunities that I'm hearing, and it's something that I was thinking about anyhow, but just listening to everything that was said outside of what I had to say, was the partnerships amongst us is that next level, right? But I think from an administrative perspective, any smart college president we're revenue driven, right? I think the K through 12s obviously have a different business model, but we're revenue driven, and we have to be able to sell to our customers, which are the students. And so these are important elements, and it's almost that simple to me.
Well, I think that like websites like was picture, were and KDA and the University of Kentucky is making things easier. The biggest, there's not a budget of money for K through 12 programs. They're a self-sustaining program. The money they bring in pays for their food, their equipment, their employees, everyone. There's not the school system doesn't put money into the program. So, money is a big issue, just like it is for K through or higher education. Many school districts have one person in the food service office, and that's the director. And that director might also be the data processing director. They might be the finance director. So the time that it takes to do the specifications, find the product, find the farmer, that type of thing is just overwhelming. And right now with COVID and employee shortages, many of the districts have gone in the red because they had to pay their employees. They have contracts with them. They had to pay their employees, and the money wasn't coming in during COVID. So those are some challenges. So if we could get them time and money, I think that things would be much easier, but don't we all say that? Those are the challenges. Distribution is a huge problem. Some of the smaller districts have, less number of schools. Obviously, it makes it easier, but still, if a food service director has to drive apples around to 5 schools, that's a problem. Money is a problem. Portion size can be a problem. So if we can work on those kinds of things, I think that they're so strict on how much fruit and vegetable, what serving size of protein, that type of thing, that we can't vary as much as maybe they can in higher education.
How do we get more food service companies to prioritize local in a meaningful way, not just talk about it and local watch, greenwash, but how do we get them to be more engaged on that?
There are 2 ways to influence this industry. One is buying power, where you spend your money, and the second is just ask for what you want. We're in the service industry, and what you ask for, we will deliver. We will create innovations, and we have some of the largest food providers in the world that we leverage in order to make that happen. That's been seen here at UK, from the whole animal program all the way through to the custom food solutions products, which I mentioned, which happen to be stored and distributed by Cisco. You would not think that they would be participating in this local agricultural space, but here we are. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in products a year through them. It's not until you ask that we have to innovate and create, It's the mother of necessity. That's where innovation comes from. So.
And that really, your point there really reminds me, so yes, it's the administrators, it's the leaders in those organizations, but really it's all of us, it's consumers demanding that, right? So at our grocery stores, at our schools, at our, if you're paying tuition at an institution of higher education, we have to act and advocate for those things, and so if enough of us are doing that, we can start to build that demand. So with that, we have till 10:15. Okay, so I'll pause now. First, let's give our panelists a round of applause. And I'd love to hear what questions you all have for our panelists. Yep.
My name is Ronnie Fields. I'm with Anderson County. And I guess one of my main questions is, how can we work together for local beef? I work with Tina Garland on creating specs that we use for K-12 schools for local beef or an RFP or an RFQ. But one of the main issues we're having is not farmers. It's not cattle farmers willing to participate, it's processors. USDA processors and USDA processors that have the equipment, as Ms. Flynn can attest to, that will give you the fat content. And that one little machine is what stands between some of our farmers that are being willing to sell to our school district and not. Now, we've got one farmer that we're working with. He's creating a really cool program. You'll probably hear about him more. He is participating in our RFQ that we're getting ready to turn in. But we need to work together on, it's not just buying power, but working with the process. You know, the cattle farmers, one of the main issues they have, they don't always get along with all the different processes. There's some drama that goes on there. Ask any cattle farmer and they'll tell you. But how can we work together for K-12 schools? And you know, we might need to do this through CKZ or the other co-ops, but how can we work together to get more local protein in? I mean, Kentucky has a lot of plants that they grow, crops they grow, but we're a big cattle farming producer, and we don't always use that in K-12 schools. So how can we work together, and what kind of state level help can we get for process?
Great question. Anybody want to tackle that?
I was going to say it's probably a good question for the guest speaker.
Yeah. See some KDA folks in the next, but I won't call on them. But I think you bring up some really important challenges. Processing can be a challenge, is a challenge in Kentucky. I think there has been quite a bit of state investment. I know my state card partners would know the numbers better than I do. But our state agronomic board invested pretty heavily in expansion of meat processing capacity in Kentucky during COVID to help free up the intense bottlenecks that were happening.
How we solved it was by the inclusion of an additional processor. So the cattle is processed at the butcher, but then it goes to an additional person who the processor delivers the primal cuts to, and then they break those down to our exact specifications, to the cut cards that we provided. They grind the meat with the appropriate level of fat to our specifications for what we're doing. So we get the exact product that we're asking for every single time. And in the times that we've had a product come in where we said, you know, has too much grease coming out of this meatloaf, what's going on? We just send a sample back to him, and he tests it, and he says, no, that's 90-10, must be the oven temperature, don't know. But we have all of these mechanisms and layers in there where we can control the entire process, and that's because we don't rely on one person in order to do that.
I mean, I don't know that everyone knows this, but you know, I came from New York, didn't grow up there, but upstate New York, rural New York, and has a lot of the exact same problems. And we leverage the state universities like you're hearing here, right? The colleges and the universities that are around the state, they have that big buying power. And we work with the individual state universities to come up with some of those solutions. And ultimately, and I can give you more detail, one of the smaller schools, who was an ag and tech school, created its own, it produced these types of things. And the students learned about that aspect of it. They learned about the marketing aspect and the business aspect, and the health and safety aspect. So somehow, embedding some of these issues into higher education through the state universities. We had Cornell University in upstate New York, similar to what UK does. You know, the land-grant universities can help a lot.
Thank you so very much. Two thoughts that come to mind. One is the element of the clearinghouse. I'm hearing you talk about that a little bit as a way of facilitating the transition from farm to the actual use of the university or college. The other thing I have a question about is what are the protocols for inspection of foods? For example, you know, are the chickens running through the lettuce patch, and then we're going to send that lettuce to UK for kids to eat? I'm being a little facetious, but nevertheless, that element of inspection and how that happens, I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are on that.
So we have food safety standards that we have to meet whether we're working with a local producer or the largest food service providers in the country, right? And there's a level of insurance minimums, there's a level of food safety standards that have to be met. And one of those on the produce side is a GAP inspection. So every person we source from has to be GAP audited.
GAP is good agricultural practices.
It's just a means of, we work with Brian Brady, who goes out to the individual farms. He does an assessment. He gets them up to the new Food Safety Modernization Act standards, and then a bit further into the good ag practices. And that allows us to feel very comfortable and confident that the food is of the standards of which we expect in this industry. It has to be USDA inspected. So a lot of the smaller processors, they just have the inspector there once a week or so, but everything, all animals are harvested and inspected under USDA inspection.
Brian, real quick, who's Center working with now?
It's Parkhurst.
No, he mentioned it, but it's the first center is the first Kentucky-based account. So they're primarily in the Northeast.
Yeah. It's all smaller schools mostly that they focus on.
We had a question over here.
Quick question on what would be a volume purchase. You gave some specific examples on cherry tomatoes and potatoes and whatnot. Frequency and volume of a couple examples. I'm trying to scale this out to either the distribution problem toward processing and or production. They have done a sustainability project with Billy Van Phillipsburg for the bourbon industry to get local rye, and you have to equate that to how many acres, and that equates to the state if it gets going. Just something along those lines would be helpful for my curiosity.
So we are all over the place in volume. So volume isn't really too much of a driving factor for us, so much as just making sure that we're not wasting it. So you'll see volumes from all over the place, but if you want to email me, I'd be happy to share direct actual volumes.
Do you care to share about, on the protein side, how many heads a week you all?
So pork, we do 7 head of hogs a week, and we do 4 head of beef. Hogs are a big seller at football, so we are smoking those guys year-round to make the pulled pork to sell during concessions. So that's why that number's a bit higher, but 7 hogs, 4 cow.
It might be interesting to do a study on the volume that's being used by the colleges, universities, the K through 12 in these different categories, and to see what those volumes actually are, to see where those shared opportunities might be, right? So how do you network those things?
I'm Bob Helfer with Harvest, and just curious, some of the issues that have been raised this morning, awareness of the panel and thoughts on controlled environment agriculture that's, we think, growing in the state now, our company and others, as far as high quality local products on a scalable commercial level, and also to the seasonal aspect. We'll be growing in the winter, shut down in the summer, more or less. So just wondering if there's awareness and thoughts on that concept.
Yeah, this is a hot topic right now in this space. I think there's room for everyone in this lane. There's an appropriate space for all of us to play in this field. We tend to primarily favor small, local, independently owned farmers first. But when their season ends, we do want to keep the money in Kentucky and to continue the economic impact for our Commonwealth. And so we do shift our purchasing over to those controlled environment spaces.
I know that Fayette County purchased lettuce well, at the time it was 5 high schools. Now there's 6 for the salad bars. And we used products from the high tunnels and that sort of thing. Problem was they couldn't keep up with us.
And that was a small, just for record, that's a
small, yeah. And then we picked up another one, and then they had problems with an infestation of some kind, and so it was a challenge. But we really tried to do that. But and then of course, feeding doesn't stop in the summertime. You made reference about people not being there. 2 food service directors here work, 24/7 sometimes all year round. And we do summer feeding programs. And one of our successes was fresh broccoli. I have a picture of a little boy sitting on a stone wall with smiling. He had broccoli in his teeth with a piece of broccoli. So seasons matter, but there are opportunities if we can get the price point down.
Good morning, Will Evans with the Bluegrass Land Use Agency. Appreciate y'all discussion. Had in the back of my mind a little time this podcast that Malcolm Gladwell did many years ago comparing 2 elite colleges and the difference in financial resources they have, how that impacted their ability to procure high quality foods.
collective master agreement that every school district could use, every state university could latch on to. They feel that.
That's a great question, and I think Katie, we would love for the Department of Education to be more engaged. And I think we globally, like those of us working in local food systems, the Department of Agriculture has been, I think, a leader in this space. I mentioned the Buy Local program earlier, which all K-12 schools can participate in, but also restaurants and other higher ed institutions. So that's a small incentive, but a way that they're trying to leverage their limited resources to engage more folks. But your point about accessibility is really important. And I will just say, pivoting to the K-12, Marty could speak more about this, but many schools, I don't know the percentage in Fayette County right now, but a lot of the schools are, I don't know what's the right term? CEP. Thank you. CEP. Community eligibility. So everyone eats for free, regardless of their income status. So I think if we can engage more school districts to source local at those CEP schools, that could be an opportunity to make sure folks who may not have access otherwise to healthy local grown food. Those are my thoughts. Panel, do you all have any other thoughts?
I'll offer a perspective from the farmer and not my current position, and that is, as long as we're going to continue to subsidize nutritionally void grain crops, we should also be subsidizing produce. It's where we get the bulk of our nutrition from, and it's what produces the food that makes us healthy and contributing citizens to our Commonwealth. And it's also the most expensive food in the grocery store, and there's a reason for that, and it starts with subsidies.
Ashton, I got one more comment. I'm Bobby Clark. I was former vice president of the Bluegrass for Evergreen Group, still on the board. A couple of years ago, we got a UK grant. And one of the things that we researched and identified, and what we've heard today, is there are a lot of people doing a lot of great things. However, how do you share that? Conferences are great. We need to do more of that, as Rob suggested. But what I was suggesting in the grant proposal is how do we set up a statewide network of farmers, distributors, and higher education and secondary education schools, so that there would be a place to just ask a question. Has anybody done this? How do I do this? And be able to share those experiences in real time with electronics. So,
cool. Thank you. Well, thank you all so much. Let's give our panelists another big round of applause.